Well, time now for our focus report. EU nations will soon decide whether the controversial chemical glyphosate can still be used in Europe or not. Well, glyphosate is a key ingredient in a herbicide produced by the US agrochemical giant Monsanto. Activists accuse Monsanto of producing chemicals despite them posing a risk to human health and the environment. Meanwhile, Washington has become the first US state to sue Monsanto for damages. Valérie Defer, Baptiste Fenwick and Hyde Fitzpatrick sent us this report.
Tacoma, just south of Seattle, an industrial waterfront lined with factories as far as the eye can see. Sherry Ton knows every bit of this bay.
Historically, the water here was the most contaminated of any water in Washington state.
This committed biochemist has been on patrol for 25 years, tracking down traces of pollution.
Pollution can still come from stormwater, where the water rains down on the site, and if anybody has spread any pollution around anywhere, it's going to run off into the waterway.
Tacoma Bay is contaminated with PCBs, a class of hazardous chemicals prohibited in the United States since 1979. Here, PCBs have been toxic to wildlife.
Do you see any sea lions out there?
Sea lions are on the front lines because PCBs have severely damaged this bay's ecosystem.
PCBs bioconcentrate, so they bioconcentrate in species like seals and sea lions because they have a lot of fat, a lot of blubber. It's been, almost 40 years since PCBs were banned. But PCBs are still out there and the animals are still bioconcentrating them. They're still building up in the food chain.
Activists say Monsanto is responsible for the pollution damaging Tacoma Bay. Now known for its agricultural herbicides and pesticides, Monsanto produced industrial chemicals for decades and was the sole producer of PCBs in the United States. Appalled by the extent of the damage, Washington State's Attorney General is taking Monsanto to court.
Monsanto was producing PCBs, and they knew many decades ago the harm that those PCBs do to our environment, to animals, and to humans. Despite that, in pursuit of profits, they kept that information quiet and kept producing it, and that's what the lawsuit is all about.
To prove his claim, the Attorney General has damaging documents discovered by the Poison Papers Project, which unearthed Monsanto's memos.
They write internally, there is too much customer market need and selfishly too much Monsanto profit to go out of the business of making PCBs.
Right.
So they know.
And so what are you expecting from this lawsuit? What would you?
Yeah, we're expecting them to pay for the damage they've done to our state. And that will be in the many, many millions of dollars, as you might imagine.
We contacted Monsanto, but the company declined our request for an interview. PCBs have become both a legal and financial challenge for authorities in Washington state. One of the biggest problems is pinpointing precise sources of contamination. Beth Schmoyer's job is to head into the field to hunt for PCBs.
Stainless steel bowls and spoons and things to collect the sample into.
Seattle's industrial boom came in the 1940s, but today the region is paying an environmental price for its impressive growth. At the time, one of the main users of PCB chemicals was the aerospace giant Boeing.
So all of that is Boeing. But World War II is when everything kind of exploded, and that was when Boeing really expanded, because it was supplying all the airplanes, or a lot of the airplanes, for the war effort.
PCBs were also used in electrical transformers, window caulking, and paint. More than 600 sites are contaminated in the Seattle area, including this former brewery being converted into residential lofts.
But you can see the paint flaking. In the past, painters often added PCBs to the paint because PCBs have really nice elastomeric properties, so it makes the paint last longer.
To find PCBs, Schmoyer digs into the depths of the city for a sample from the sewer.
The problem with them is they are very recalcitrant, so they don't break down very quickly. So once they get in the environment, they pretty much stay. It's not like they're going to biologically break down, they stay. So you have to remove them physically.
The cost of cleaning up every contaminated site and physically removing the PCBs to a safe place is extraordinary.
It's billions of dollars. The site cleanup on this alone is on the order of $300 million just to clean up the sediment.
Samples from the field are meticulously examined at the lab.
Hi, some samples to deliver.
Along with the environmental damage, authorities are worried about the risk to public health. Studies have shown that PCBs are toxic to humans.
PCBs are known today to be carcinogenic to people. Even very low levels of PCBs in the water can build up to concerning levels in fish. So for human exposure, our biggest exposure source today really is through the fish that we eat.
For 40 years, PCBs were sold around the world. If the state of Washington wins its lawsuit, it could trigger legal action by other states and countries, a precedent that could be devastating for Monsanto.
Well, today's Focus Report coming to us from the US. For more on this, Sebastian Mabil's a lawyer at the Paris Bar and a specialist in environmental law. Good to have you, Mr. Mabil. A first question. Washington is the very first state to sue Monsanto for damages. This is huge, and it could set a precedent, couldn't it?
Yes, it can. It can, even in France, even in Europe, because all of the world is contaminated with PCB. PCB was used in electric transformers mainly, on paints, and it costs a lot of money to decontaminate PCBs, because PCBs, if we don't decontaminate PCBs, they stay in the web of life. And at the end, it contaminates people. It's how which is in danger.
When you say that they stay in the web of life, what are you referring to exactly?
It's that we need special technical process to decontaminate PCBs. For instance, in France, there are only 7 sites which are allowed to decontaminate the oil polluted by PCBs or other things. And it costs a lot of money. And it's citizens who pays this decontamination.
So it's a hugely costly process, you're saying. Now, if we think about Washington's lawsuit, they are suing not just on one ground, but on several grounds: product liability, negligence, and even trespassing. They say that, look, Monsanto hasn't thought about injuring the state's natural resources. This is going to be quite difficult to prove for Washington State.
Yes, quite difficult. But there is this threat, because there was the Monsanto poison, the Monsanto papers, which relieved, because of journalists, which relieved that Monsanto knew, but didn't said to the authorities that PCB were poison, as well as today glyphosate is a poison also.
OK, Sebastian, Mabil, you're a lawyer at the Paris Bar. You've joined me in the studio today. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
France 24.